Hi everyone. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it today, but um, I just wanted to start off by giving a little bit of the lecture and in this recording. So I heard your guys' debate went really well, and I'm really glad about that. But today we're going to be talking about sustaining life beyond Earth. So this is kind of our transition into space biology. And there is a lot of space stressors that afflict life because it didn't evolve to live out there, right? It evolved under the nice cushy environment of the Earth's atmosphere, with the magnetosphere that protects from radiation. Of course, the gravity that Earth provides, not too much, not too little. I mean, this is how we evolved um, to maintain life under exactly this amount of gravity, too little or too much gravity. Micro or hypergravity provides challenges. So specifically, we have here microgravity, so low gravitational forces. Of course, we're never going to get zero gravity, right? So everything in space has mass, and everything that has mass has gravity. So we have gravity as well. And this is about like 1 millionth of Earth's gravity, and objects will exist in a state of free fall or orbit in this case. So we have microgravity, but I also wanted to mention hypergravity. So especially the acceleration that it takes to exit Earth's orbit um, has puts a lot of strain, because that extreme increase in acceleration causes us to feel a lot of gravity on our body. So we have to be conscious of what astronauts are going through, not just microgravity, but on our way there, a lot of hypergravity as well. So there's going to be in the future limitations to how fast we can accelerate, not necessarily how fast we can move in terms of velocity, the speed. So our Earth is orbiting like so many million miles, not million miles, but so many, 1,000 miles per hour, like orbiting, like rotating itself as well as orbiting. So we're moving through space right now really fast. But the problem is the acceleration. How quickly do we get to that speed, right? So that's what causes that hypergravity. We also have radiation. So these are caused by galactic cosmic rays or solar particle events. So the type of radiation that we experience in space is a little bit different than we experience from UV radiation, than we experience from going into like an MRI machine, getting some scan, or an X-ray machine. That kind of radiation is different. So if we consider these like types of radiation as little bullets that are going to damage our DNA, we can think of our galactic cosmic rays as giant cannonballs. They're causing huge amounts of damage in terms of like how large these particles are that cause damage. So the type of radiation on that we normally experience here on Earth is a little bit different than what we'd be exposed to in space, right? So this requires really strong shielding methods to protect ourselves in space. And thankfully, on the ISS, on the International Space Station, Earth's magnetosphere is still pretty protective because the ISS is honestly super, super close to Earth. But when we start getting out a little bit further from that protection, then this is going to be a huge problem, especially, for example, on Mars when we get there. So isolation and confinement are also significant challenges as well, psychologically, as well as in terms of the microbiology that's growing on the ISS. So that's important to consider because what you send off with yourself onto a spacecraft is what you're going to be, staying with that whole time in terms of the microbes. Um, and then extreme temperatures and the vacuum of space, right? There's no air in space. And there's extreme temperature variations. So that requires a lot of thermal regulation, right? Because we have extreme heat coming from the sun and then extreme cold when we're not, you know, in the sun's you know, uh, direction, right? And some other challenges, of course, are some space debris. We have tons of junk orbiting our planet in space debris that needs to be avoided because they're going at very high speeds. And then we have limited resources, right? We can't just, get an Amazon a package delivered and onto the ISS. Dealing with dust is a huge problem when landing on other surfaces. So on other planets or on other moons, that dust is a huge challenge that's going to be coming up, right? Because we're going to be landing very carefully, requiring a lot of that not propulsion, but the like kind of like jetpacks, you know what I mean? Like the air that's helping it land very slowly and securely is also pushing up a lot of dust, and that's a problem. And then also planetary protection. We'll probably talk about that in another lecture, but just being conscious of what microbes and what kind of life are we sending and maybe contaminating, and then maybe bringing back and contaminating Earth with, right? Potentially. Spacecraft handling, communication delays, right? These distances are significant. They can only go the speed of light, which sounds fast, but we talked about how on Mars it takes, minutes. On Jupiter, it take, I think, we talked about like half an hour, 20 minutes, or an hour. I think on Mars it's like a 20-minute delay. On Jupiter, it's like an hour delay or something like that. And then medical emergencies, right? How are we going to handle that when we can't go into an ambulance and a doctor, right? So what is space biology specifically, and why is it important? Well, space biology is basically the study of life in the space environment, and then focusing on how space flight and extraterrestrial environments affect living organisms. It's a little bit different than astrobiology, right? So this is looking at human expansion, scientific exploration, and then planetary protection. This is just a preview of the human physiological changes in spaceflight. We're going to be going in depth in the upcoming lectures. So the main things to take note of here are the cardiovascular systems that because of the microgravity, are causing fluid shifts, right, in the blood. And then this leads to decreased plasma volume and orthostatic intolerances. So this basically, perhaps Haley can explain this a little bit more. This one I'm not so familiar with. But on the musculoskeletal system, there's gonna be a significant loss of muscle mass and bone density because we don't have that gravity requiring that maintenance. And so we're gonna have a lot of changes in the actual microarchitecture of the bone. And there's going to be a lot of reduced regeneration of bone tissue, so of those bone cells. We also looking at the neurovestibular system. There's going to be some motion sickness and coordination issues. The immune system, it has been noted that there's altered immune responses and susceptibility to infections. We also see in the gastrointestinal system some potential tissue damage, and also the microbiome. That's kind of what I'm studying, which we'll talk about later. The ocular system. So the pressure changes in spaceflight are really, really important, right? Because there always has to be, there's no pressure in space, right? And so the pressure of the ISS or whatever, spacecraft you're staying in has to be maintained, but still with the hypergravity and microgravity, it causes changes in that pressure in the eye. So the eye has like fluid that has inside of it, and that's altered in space flight, causing vision changes. And we also have psychological effects. This is driven by things like circadian rhythm changes, because we don't have a night and day on the ISS, right? It's orbiting the Earth like every 90 minutes, right? So they're going to have an artificial light system to make sure that circadian rhythm is good. And then, of course, just being in isolation away from everyone you care about is really challenging. So here is an interesting study that has been done on the ISS. There were two astronaut twins. One stayed, on Earth while the other one went to spaceflight. So they could look at specific modifications to, biochemical modifications, cognitive epigenomics, which is looking at not just the DNA, but slight modifications to the DNA, kind of like on and off switches to if genes are turned on and off, kind of. Gene expression, so what kind of RNA is being expressed right now? Genes are being expressed to turn into proteins. Immune changes, metabolomics, so what kind of, what's the metabolism, how is metabolism changing in these people? Microbiome changes, proteomics, so what are the proteins, how are the protein changes throughout the body? Physiology and telomeres. And yeah, that's pretty much the main thing here. The only, downside to this experiment was that it's kind of an N of one, right? So there's only one person on Earth and one person going in space. Well, at least they're twins, but still, like, it's not a huge sample size to be doing an experiment. And now we want to transition into plant physiology. So plants are super, super important, and we'll talk about why, but some changes that plants undergo are gravity sensing and response changes. They lose their primary gravity cue in microgravity, of course. And gene expression changes have been noted. So a lot of them are related to stress response, cell wall modifications of the plant cell wall, hormone signaling. Hormones are kind of how the plant communicates throughout itself. And we also have differences in cell growth, cell proliferation, plant cell growth, and development. So microgravity can alter the cell division rate, so mitosis, and different root growth patterns may change. The leaf development and structure could change. This can impact the photosynthetic capacities. So speaking of photosynthesis, because there's also changes in leaf orientation and cellular structure, this can affect how much energy it's taking in from light. And there's also altered gas exchanges due to a lack of convection in microgravity. So that's another big challenge, is there's not a lot of circulation on the ISS or any spacecrafts, because microgravity is just keeping the air like floating around. And so there's ventilation systems are extremely important. Otherwise, the CO2 emitted from the plants is just going to sit right there. It's going to sit right by the plant. And then it's not going to have access to oxygen instead. Or sorry, the reverse. Plants need oxygen. So they release oxygen and they need CO2. So they're going to be taking up CO2, but then they're going to releasing oxygen, which is their waste, right? And they're not going to have access to their to the air that they actually need, because it's just pooling there and not circulating. Stress responses, we talked about. Water. So the lack of gravity-driven water movement also affects water distribution within plants. So nutrient uptake and distribution are also altered, leading to deficiencies or toxicities going on. And then also, again, that root zone development and environment is really changing. Circadian rhythms, like I mentioned, are super important for plants, of course. And so this disrupts their circadian rhythms as well. Because sometimes plants have certain roles that they switch on at night or day. There's also microbial interactions we're not going to mention here. The effects of radiation. So plants are pretty hardy to radiation because of their exposure to sunlight all the time, but in space, we talked about how the radiation is a lot stronger, a lot more different. So this can cause more DNA damage in the plants, lead to mutations, and overall plant health is affected. So these are the main components I want to mention here. And then protecting plant life. So there needs to be strategies to protect plant life in space flight. So that includes having advanced growth chambers that have specialized facilities called VEGGIE, a vegetable production system. These facilities provide controlled environments with that proper ventilation I was talking about, to mitigate gas exchange issues. There also needs to be lighting optimization. So red light has been found to enhance plant adaptation to spaceflight environments. LED lighting systems in growth chambers also allow for the adjustable light spectra and intensities. Genetic engineering has been applied. Nutrient delivery systems are also important. This allows the development of specialized nutrient delivery systems to make sure that plants get proper nutrition in microgravity. There's also gravitropism compensation. So this research is looking at methods to compensate for the lack of gravitation issues, and some techniques to be applied here are mechanical stimuli or centrifuges, which apply artificial gravity by producing that acceleration, like I mentioned, that causes gravity. And then stress response modulation. So there have been experiments to try to basically reduce the stress responses in plants. But yeah, there's also the bioregenerative life support systems that integrate plants with the life support systems that are on the ISS, for example, recycle resources and provide multiple benefits, because recycling is especially important in spaceflight. So looking at space architecture, just an overview here in general, it's super essential for long duration missions and colonization in the future, or settlements in the future, and providing fresh food, oxygen, psychological benefits too, just maintaining and being around nature. And then they also support the bioregenerative life support systems that we'll mention a little bit later today. But some challenges, like I mentioned, microgravity, limited resources, light conditions changing, radiation changing, lack of natural convection for air circulation. And then some key research areas that are being focused on are, again, responses to microgravity, optimizing those growth conditions, developing space-specific plant varieties, nutrient delivery systems, light optimization. We have the veggie that I mentioned, advanced plant habitat, the Eden ISS project, hydroponics, plants that can grow in water, aeroponics, plants that can grow in air, and then LED lighting systems. And the future would be to scale these productions, these plant productions to a larger scale, adapting techniques for lunar and Martian environments. So growing these plants potentially in Mars or lunar soil and dirt, basically, and then making more things autonomous for less, so there's less for the astronauts to focus on. They have a lot of things to do every day. And integrating architecture into a closed loop life support system, right? So it's kind of self-sustaining life system. Some interesting things I wanted to mention here. This is just a cool project that's being focused on, is trying to grow plants like tomatoes in Mars regolith, or like lunar regolith, I think is on one of them on the left. But basically taking all the ingredients that are in lunar or Martian soil and trying to grow plants has been a huge area of experimentation and study. I think Haley and I, we were at a conference last year, and they definitely talked about their efforts to grow plants. And one thing that stuck out to me was how maybe the first generation of plants that are to grow in, let's say, Martian soil, they struggle. Okay, there's not a lot of nutrients in there for the plants, but as we keep going into future generations, there's a lot more organic matter in the soil, so the plants grow pretty well, honestly, just like they would here. Okay, now we're going to go into specifics about different microbes that grow, or that are affected by space flight. And I'm going to stop before I get to viruses, because Haley is an expert in virology. So looking at bacteria here, there are some overall changes that we notice. So altered growth rates, so how fast the bacteria divide and reproduce. And then also some species have increased virulence, which means they get a little bit more aggressive in how they might infect, right? So while there's applications for human health, we're definitely, thinking about human health here when we're talking about bacteria, but also bacteria are super useful because they also can produce some chemicals or products that we use, right? And so biotechnological uses in waste recycling, so they can kind of remove toxins or certain wastes and transform them. We have food production and then pharmaceuticals they can help with, definitely. And what they experience in spaceflight, though, are an activation of certain stress response pathways. So they start getting more stress and they express that through what genes they're expressing and what proteins they're expressing. There's an increase in the mutation rates, of course, due to that radiation. There's altered nutrient uptake and utilization. Maybe this is perhaps due to, again, microgravity causing less circulation of like the liquids. Then enhanced biofilm formation. So biofilms are basically where bacteria kind of grow like really condensed and form like a slimy kind of substance, which is made of glycans of sugars and protect themselves. So this is actually a concern because biofilms make bacteria harder to attack. Quorum sensing is affected, so that's kind of how bacteria signal to each other and communicate with each other. And then also symbiotic and pathogenic interactions are significantly involved in spaceflight. So symbiotic, for example, our microbiome, or pathogenic, so some more dangerous bacteria. Looking at fungi, some fungi, like the species, the Aspergillus species, show, again, altered growth patterns. So how quickly are they dividing, reproducing, and then increased sporulation in gravity, which is a concern, right? Because we don't want them to be necessarily sporulating and spreading everywhere, like let's say around the ISS. I remember, I think it was in the conference that Haley and I were at, but basically they noticed that some fungus was growing on the ISS unintentionally. And they figured out that this was due to condensation kind of cooling up after their little showers. So they have a little bit of a showering area, but the water was kind of cooling, or like kind of creating a moist environment for this fungi to grow, which they didn't anticipate. We also see secondary metabolite production changes. So microgravity can affect basically the metabolism of potentially beneficial compounds. For example, Penicillium chrysogenum produces more penicillin in simulated gravity. So this is a good thing for pharmaceutical purposes. And then fungal hyphae also could potentially show altered branching patterns. So if you've ever seen fungus, they have kind of like a tree-like structures on a microscopic scale. And we also notice cell wall composition in space is altered. Here's our last slide, looking at archaea. So we have bacteria and we also have archaea, the different domain of life. And these, for example, are extremophilic archaea, extremophiles, like those found in hypersaline environments. So these are probably halophiles, right? That can sustain life in very salty environments, show enhanced stress tolerance in simulated microgravity, and then also some methanogenic archaea. So archaea that can consume methane exhibit altered methane production rates in microgravity conditions. These have more implications for biotechnology and biomanufacturing, but archaea, thankfully, are not, I don't think there's been a single species found that's actually dangerous for humans. So this is not the most imminent concern. But yeah, I think this is my last slide, and Haley's going to go ahead, but I will see you guys next time, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there. Thank you.